Hey guys. Tonight's story starts with a pot that screams, a spoon that's definitely cursed, and a cook who just tasted something they probably shouldn't have. You've been sent to help in a kitchen that isn't a kitchen. Unless your definition of kitchen includes open fire, wet wood, and a goat named Gregory who keeps trying to eat your apron. There are no stoves, no timers, and absolutely no idea what that bubbling noise is. The food might be soup or soap. Honestly, no one knows anymore. Now get comfortable. Let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up to smoke in your nostrils and someone shouting the word oats like it's a curse. Your head aches, your feet are cold, and your tongue feels like you've been licking moss for sport. There's a fireplace in front of you, or at least something pretending to be one, filled with damp logs, stacked in what might be considered a pattern if the builder had used blindfolds in spite. The fire isn't lit, it's sulking. A thin ribbon of smoke curls from a corner of the hearth, dragging the scent of mildew, sorrow, and someone's forgotten sock across the room. A woman bursts in with flour on her cheek and a rolling pin gripped like a weapon. She stares at you, squints like she's considering whether you're edible, and then shouts, "If you're not stirring, you're fetching. The oats won't wait." Then she vanishes again, leaving behind the scent of yeast and unresolved trauma. You look around. This is not a kitchen. Not unless kitchens have cracked stone floors, ceilings low enough to threaten your dignity, and chickens wandering in and out like they own the lease. There's no stove. Just the sad fireplace, a table held together with string and shared trauma, and a collection of pots that look like they've seen things. One is boiling something invisible. Another is upside down, with a cat perched on, top like a judgmental paperweight. A boy no older than 10 appears beside you, with a bucket half full of something sloshing. It might be milk. It might be disappointment. "You're the new one," he says, flatly. Then, without warning, he hands you a spoon and disappears into a hole in the wall that may or may not be a door. The spoon is sticky. You don't want to think about why. The fireplace coughs. You kneel awkwardly beside it, holding a splintered piece of wood that someone's labeled starter in charcoal. The pile of logs is already damp enough to qualify as soup. You poke at them. Nothing happens. You poke again. A spider runs out and dares you to continue. You don't. You try blowing. That gets you smoke in the face, and one particularly vocal cough that might have been your lung resigning. Somewhere in the wall, something thuds, then giggles. A hunched old man stumbles in next, humming a tune with no notes and less rhythm. He wears a hat that used to be fur and now resembles a compost heap. He gestures vaguely toward the hearth. "Use the fat drippings," he says. You blink. He points to a cracked bowl on the floor, filled with what looks like melted wax and dreams deferred. Grease the logs, coaxes the flame. Old trick. Works sometimes. You take a scoop. It's cold and lumpy and smells like betrayal. You smear it on the logs. Your dignity peels away, one smear at a time. The man nods, then leaves without elaboration, like a smoke-scented prophecy. Someone behind you shouts, "It's burning." You spin. You're not sure if they mean dinner or the house, but the fire has finally caught, sort of. It flickers at the edge of the log like it's unsure about this commitment. You blow on it. It sputters. You whisper sweet encouragement. It flares slightly. You feel victorious. Then the wind shifts, and the smoke hits you square in the face, curling into your eyes, your mouth, your soul. You sneeze violently and drop the sticky spoon into the assays. Ash. It lands with a sad thud. The cat blinks at you from atop the pot and slowly licks its paw, judging, always judging. Through the haze, the woman returns. She's carrying a sack of flour like it insulted her family. "Put that in the pot," she says, gesturing toward the bubbling cauldron in the corner. "Not too much, not too little, just enough." She does not elaborate. Then she leaves again, because apparently everyone here just enters, issues riddles, and exits dramatically. You stare at the pot. You stare at the flour. You stare at the spoon in the ash. You use your hand. The flour hits the bubbling mess with a sound that might be described as concerning. It hisses. You back away slowly, rethinking every decision that led you here. Something in the mixture rises, then sinks, then gurgles. The boy returns. "You're doing fine," he says, deadpan. "Better than the last one," he cried. You nod like this is comforting. From outside comes a yell. "Where's the lard?" Another yell responds. "The dog ate it." A third voice chimes in. "He earned it." No further explanation is provided. You look down at your hands, now covered in soot, flour, and what may be goat hair. The fire crackles half-heartedly. The pot burbles like it's remembering a past life. The spoon remains lost to the ash. This is your life now. You're in the kitchen, sort of, and dinner is depending on you. God help us all. The hearth watches you. Not literally, but you can feel its judgment deep in your spine, like the way a grandmother stares at you when you use the wrong spoon for jam. You crouch in front of it with hands blackened from soot, fingers raw from failed kindling rituals, and a growing suspicion that this fire simply doesn't like you. The logs are stacked like a Jenga tower of poor decisions, slightly damp, stubborn, and at least one of them smells faintly of mushrooms. Not the good kind, the angry, cursed kind that only grow near graveyards or behind the privy. You try again. Flax, straw, the desperate breath of a person who used to believe in themselves. You strike the flint. Sparks fly. Nothing happens. The hearth does not so much as whisper. It just sits there, smug and stone cold, like a noble with gout. A chicken walks past behind you. You pause, turn, see nothing, but a faint cluck lingers in the air like a warning. You try again, this time with more effort. You blow until your cheeks ache. A wisp of smoke curls up, considers the situation, and immediately dies like it just remembered it left the cauldron on. You slam your fist against the log. It thuds in a way that implies deep offense. The hearth creaks. Not a structural creak, more of a sentient one, like it's about to file a complaint to the village council. The chicken walks through again, same direction, same speed, no eye contact. You wonder briefly if it's the same chicken or a cousin, or perhaps a ghost. At this point, it wouldn't surprise you if this place had ghost chickens, or haunted firewood, or both. Someone shouts from the other room, "How's the flame?" You respond with a sort of strained wheeze that could be interpreted as either "fine" or "everything's on fire," depending on optimism. No one checks. The hearth shifts slightly, not physically, emotionally. You try again, this time using a dried braid of something someone swore was fire-starting herb, though it smells like someone's forgotten laundry. You hold the flame to it. It smolders, hisses, and then emits a noise that sounds dangerously like laughter. Not human laughter. Just wrong. You blink away smoke. It's thin, but relentless, curling into your hair, your nose, your sense of self-worth. You cough, wiping your eyes with a sleeve that leaves behind a smear of something unidentifiable and deeply personal. The fire isn't alive, not really, but you're starting to believe it has opinions. Loud, sulking opinions that involve not doing what it's told. The chicken comes back, this time stopping briefly to stare at you. Just a glance, long enough to make a point, short enough to avoid consequences. Then it continues on its route like a commuter with better things to do. You glance around for help. There is none. A ladle dangles uselessly from a hook. A pot simmers on a different fire that someone else clearly had better luck starting. Somewhere, someone is chopping something rhythmically, confidently, like they've never once failed to coax flames from indifferent logs. The smoke thickens. It doesn't rise like smoke should. It spreads. Sideways, upward, then back down. It moves through the room like it's looking for someone to blame. You try opening a window. There is no window, just a gap in the stone wall where wind sometimes howls and occasionally drops in unsolicited bugs. You back away from the hearth, not out of fear, out of respect, or something adjacent to surrender. The smoke forms a pattern for a moment, 3 swirling curls, like an angry pastry. You squint, then blink. It's gone. The fire still hasn't caught. The logs look wetter than before. One of them might be sweating or crying. It's hard to say. A voice behind you says, "Try talking to it." You spin. It's the old man again, the one with the hat that once had dignity. He leans on a stick that may also be a spoon, depending on the season. "Fire's like a mule," he says. You don't ask. You convince. He nods, as if that clarifies anything, then disappears through a door that probably wasn't there a moment ago. You turn back to the hearth. It sits in its stone cradle, unmoved, unimpressed. You kneel, whisper something encouraging, and light another bundle of straw. This time, a flame catches, just briefly, a flicker, a spark of hope. You lean in, coaxing it, feeding it, babying it like a cranky royal child. The flame dances, then it sneezes, spits, and goes out again. You sit back, defeated. The chicken returns, drops something that might be a beet, and walks away with a cluck that feels very pointed. The hearth is quiet, but you can swear. It's smiling. You are handed a tour of the tools like a prisoner being shown around their cell. The cook, whose name might be Margot, or possibly just Oyu, waves a hand toward a collection of objects strewn across a warped table and a series of hooks embedded in the stone wall. "Don't touch the small knife. It bites," she says, which you assume is a joke. It's not. The small knife later nicks your finger without ever being unsheathed. You apologize to it on instinct. There's a cauldron in the corner that looks like it's been used in at least 3 unrelated rituals. It's blackened with soot, dented along one side in the shape of what appears to be a boot, and filled with a mysterious liquid that smells like boiled socks and ambition. Margot slaps it affectionately. She's moody, but loyal. You're not sure if she's referring to the pot or herself. Next, she points to the spit. It's suspended above the hearth by a frame that leans ever so slightly toward collapse. The spit is not centered. It lists lazily, turning at its own pace like it's on holiday. Sometimes it spins. Sometimes it don't, she says with a shrug, just like my husband. You nod politely and make a note to never place anything expensive or alive on that spit. There's a ladle the size of a canoe paddle hanging from a nail, bent slightly at the neck like it's lost all hope. A cleaver rests nearby, stained with something you tell yourself is beetroot. The cleaver doesn't make eye contact. No one talks about the cleaver. On the far end of the table sits what might be a mortar and pestle, though the bowl has a crack wide enough to birth a mouse family, and the pestle is just a rock with opinions. You ask if there's anything used for grinding grain. Margot snorts and gestures to a flat stone and a rounder one. Use those. Or your teeth. Up to you. You're introduced to the butter churn, which resembles a barrel and a punishment. You crank it once, and it lets out a moan so long and low, you check to make sure no one else heard it. The boy from earlier walks by, points to it, and says, "It remembers." Then he vanishes again, which is becoming a pattern. There's a long knife hanging beside the doorway. You ask if it's for bread. Margot laughs, a sound not unlike gravel being stirred in a pail. "That's the bread knife," she says. "Also the fence post knife. Also the get out of my cabbage patch knife. It has not been sharpened since the previous century, but looks like it could still split a man in half out of sheer determination. The mixing bowl has a crack. The spoon has a name. The ladle has a dent in it that looks eerily like a nose. You ask how old these tools are. Margot gives you a look. "They were old when I was born," she says. "They'll outlive all of us. They already have." You are handed a pair of tongs that smell faintly of ham and terror. They pinch unexpectedly, as if testing your reflexes. Margot nods. Good grip, she says. Don't get on their bad side. There is, apparently, a cheese mold. You find it under a towel next to what might be a book, but turns out to be a very dense biscuit. The mold has legs. You don't mention it. The only thing even remotely resembling a pan is a flat iron disc with no handle, warped into a concave shape by time, heat, and maybe divine punishment. That's for cakes, she says. You believe her, but only because denying it might make the pan angry. By the time the tour ends, you're fairly certain at least half of these implements are sentient. One is definitely cursed, and several may have witnessed crimes. Margot hands you a spoon with 3 different substances dried onto it and says, "Start stirring. Doesn't matter what. Just stir something. You. Don't ask questions. You stir." The spoon twitches. You keep going. The spoon is already in your hand when the rules arrive. Not written, not spoken, just sort of transferred. You feel them settle into your bones the way cold settles into your toes in this eternally damp kitchen. The first rule is immediate, primal, delivered via a look from Margot that nearly sears itself into your forehead. Never drop the spoon. Her eyes narrow when she sees your grip falter, and for a second you're pretty sure she can see your future, and it includes shame, failure, and a chicken pecking judgmentally at your corpse. The spoon is wooden, ancient, and has the weight of history. Not because it's heavy, although it is, but because it seems to remember things. Dark things. Recipes gone wrong. Oaths broken. One corner is permanently stained, a grayish hue that doesn't seem to correspond to any known food group, and it's slightly sticky, no matter how long you hold it. You try to wipe your hand discreetly on your tunic. The stickiness moves with you. You stir something in the pot, at least you think it's food. It smells like onions, shoes, and ambition. Margot watches. You stir clockwise. She nods. You stir counterclockwise. She hisses like you've blasphemed. Apparently, the direction matters. You ask why. Because, she says. That is the entire explanation. You return to stirring in the approved direction. The spoon moves through the mixture with the solemnity of a ritual. Occasionally it hits something solid. You don't check what. You just keep going. The boy reappears from the shadows like he's part raccoon. It remembers the last person who dropped it, he whispers. You ask what happened. He holds up a sock. It's burnt and smells like vengeance. Then he scurries off again, possibly through the ceiling. Rule 2 settles in as you try to figure out what exactly is caked onto the handle. It flakes a little when you touch it. You sniff it before. You can stop yourself and immediately regret every decision that led to this moment. It smells like fermented garlic and taxes. You go to scrape it off. Margot appears at your elbow with the suddenness of thunder. Don't ask, she says, low and serious. It's better that way. You freeze mid-flake. The spoon pulses. You apologize to it under your breath. By now, you've realized it's never just a spoon. It's a status symbol, a tool of power, a baton passed from cook to cook like some kind of culinary Excalibur. When Margot leaves it in your care, the room hushes. Even the pot stops bubbling. You feel the pressure of a dozen generations leaning on your shoulder, whispering about porridge viscosity and the correct way to threaten a guest with a ladle. You attempt to set it down once to grab a cloth. The spoon sticks to your palm. Not in a metaphorical way. It physically refuses to leave your hand. When you tug, it tugs back. You whisper again, this time with more sincerity. It eventually lets go. You don't make that mistake again. At one point, a visiting neighbor tries to pick it up without asking. The room goes silent. The fire hisses. Margot turns around slowly, her expression flat and lethal. That's not yours, she says, and the woman backs away without a word. You look down. The spoon is vibrating, just slightly, like a hornet's warning. Later, Margot tells you the spoon has been in the kitchen longer than the roof. When the ceiling collapses, she says, that spoon'll still be stirring. You're not sure if that's hyperbole. You're not sure about anything anymore. Least of all what's currently stuck to your wrist from resting the handle too close to your skin. You stir. The pot thickens. The spoon hums softly. Or maybe that's your nerves. You drop a chunk of bread in to soak and the spoon shudders as if disapproving. You remove the bread. Apologize again. The stickiness increases. You learn to listen to it. When it stiffens, you stop stirring. When it leans, you follow. When it points, you obey. It knows. You don't know how it knows, but it does. You begin to understand why Margot never leaves the kitchen without blessing it first. Why the boy avoids eye contact when it's in motion. Why the cat doesn't touch it even when it falls on the floor, which it never does. But if it did, the cat would still say no. The spoon is sacred. The spoon is sticky. And now, so are you. The first thing you learn about Gertrude the hen is that she doesn't fear death. The second thing you learn is that she knows exactly how to weaponize her beak and is familiar with the human pressure points. You're handed a dull knife and pointed toward the small, fenced-in patch of yard where Gertrude roams like a feathered warlord. Margot gestures vaguely, mutters something about doing your share, and disappears back into the kitchen, leaving you alone with the task of transforming a living creature into dinner without accidentally turning yourself into lunch. Gertrude watches you approach. She does not blink. You do. Several times. You attempt a friendly cooing sound, but it comes out more like a distressed kazoo. She tilts her head, judging, then struts behind a barrel like you've failed some kind of invisible test. You crouch, extend your hand, and murmur something you hope is calming. Gertrude hurls herself directly at your face. You fall backwards into a pile of hay and what may have been a goat once. She hops onto a crate, flaps her wings once slow and deliberate, and lets out a sound that can only be described as a taunt. You try again. She vanishes behind the wheelbarrow, then reappears on the roof. You don't know how. You don't ask. The kitchen dog ambles out to see what the fuss is about. It's a large, hairy thing that may be part bear, with one ear and eyes that say, "I've seen worse." It watches you try to corner the chicken again, and its tail does not wag. You could swear its size. You lunge. Gertrude sidesteps like a trained dancer. You try flanking. She doubles back and pecks your shin. You try reason. She pecks your pride. A small child appears, sticky-handed and barefoot, wearing a tunic that has definitely been used as a napkin at some point. "Want me to do it?" they ask, already reaching for a nearby stick. Desperation overrides logic. You say, "Yes, this is a mistake." The child chases Gertrude in wide, manic circles while screaming a song that seems to have no melody or point. Gertrude, surprisingly nimble, avoids every swipe, every leap, every ill-conceived strategy. You watch helplessly as the child attempts a diving roll into a cabbage patch. The cabbage patch does not survive. Gertrude does. You manage to grab her. Somehow, against all odds, against the laws of nature and your own coordination, you get both hands around her middle and lift. She freezes. You freeze. There is a moment where time holds its breath. Then she pecks your thumb with the force of a small god and flaps straight into your chest. You release her, fall into the cabbage crater, and lie there for a moment while the child claps and the dog finally walks away, disappointed. Eventually, Margot returns. She sees your face, your shirt, your bleeding thumb. She nods. "Gertrude's tricky," she says. "Last lad tried to catch her, ran off to become a monk." You wonder if the monastery has chickens. You wonder if the chickens are in charge. She takes a sack of grain, throws a handful into the corner of the yard, and watches as Gertrude strolls calmly over to eat. With a speed that feels personally offensive, Margot scoops her up and tucks her under one arm like a feathery purse. Gertrude does not resist. She looks at you, and somehow she smirks. Back in the kitchen, you wash your hands, your arms, your face. You look in the cracked mirror above the basin and see someone who has been bested by a hen. The spoon lies on the counter. It seems amused. Later, you eat stew that tastes faintly of chicken, victory, and mild humiliation. You don't ask if it's Gertrude. You don't want to know. But the next morning, you see her again. She's in the yard, very much alive. And you start to understand that in this place, death is negotiable. But Gertrude is not. You don't even remember what you did differently this time. The fire just happens. Not gracefully, not cleanly, but very suddenly and very much involving your left sleeve. One moment you're cursing the wood and whispering dark things into the ashes, and the next, you're standing too close, too hopeful, too flammable. There's a whoosh, a pop, and then the unmistakable smell of burning wool. You flap your arm in a panic, slapping at your tunic with your other hand like you're trying to wrestle yourself into submission. A ladle is thrown at you from across the room, which, to be fair, does hit the fire and not your face. The flames on your sleeve die down, mostly. Everyone cheers. You pause, blinking through the smoke that's decided to settle in your eyebrows. The cheer isn't loud, but it's unified, like the kind of applause given to a child who almost fell down the stairs but somehow turned it into a dance move. Margot gives you a nod. The boy claps once, slowly. The dog lifts its head and then lowers it again. Even the cat blinks in what might be reluctant approval or maybe just eye crust. You're not sure if the celebration is genuine or a group coping mechanism, but the fire's alive. It crackles with purpose now, licking the sides of the blackened hearth like it's been waiting for this moment its whole miserable life. It makes heat. It makes light. It makes you feel marginally like a functioning human being. If that human were mostly ash and shame, you take a step back. Your tunic smolders faintly, a patch near the waist curling inward as if trying to distance itself from your choices. The spoon is still sticky, but it seems pleased. The cauldron gives a subtle gurgle, the kind that says, finally. Even the spit rotates for a second, like a lazy cheerleader trying to keep morale up. Margot hands you a piece of bread with some kind of paste on it. You're not sure if it's a reward or just something she was holding already, but you eat it. It tastes like smoky peas and fear. Not bad, someone mutters. Took long enough, but no one claims it when you spin around. It may have been the chicken. You sit down on the low stool that wobbles slightly to the left and watch the flames climb up the logs, dancing like they know you almost gave up. Your eyes sting, your thumb is definitely burnt, and your dignity is somewhere outside with the goat. But the fire is lit, and it's yours. Well, sort of. Technically it belongs to the hearth, the house, the ancestors, and possibly the spoon. But for now, you're allowed to sit near it. Margot tosses a handful of something into the cauldron. It hisses, bubbles, then settles. Needs another hour, she says, stirring with the confidence of a woman who could make soup from gravel. Keep it fed. Don't let it go out. And don't burn the cat again. You hadn't noticed the cat was burned before. You make a mental note not to ask. The boy sits beside you, smelling faintly of smoke and onions. You did all right, he says. Better than the last one. He lit the dog. You glance over at the dog. The dog glances back, then pointedly turns away. The fire shifts, sending a plume of warmth across your face. You let your shoulders drop for the first time in what feels like hours. There's still flour in your hair. Your knees ache from crouching, and something sticky from earlier refuses to leave your left elbow. But none of it matters at the moment, because the fire is lit. By accident, yes, with a small touch of personal combustion, but lit nonetheless. The stew begins like most questionable decisions, with too much water, too little planning, and a vague sense that someone else should probably be in charge. It's gray, which is not inherently a bad sign. Metal is gray, stones are gray, the sky before a noble battle is gray, but this gray is more the shade of apathy, the kind of color that comes from overboiled hope and vegetables that never had a chance. You stand by the cauldron, stirring slowly, the sacred spoon dragging through the sludge like it's mourning better meals. Steam rises in low, solemn curls, catching in your nostrils and clinging there with the clinginess of damp wool. It smells mostly like root vegetables and stubbornness, but there's a sharp note at the back, something that might be parsnip or possibly despair. Margot passes behind you, peeks into the pot, and nods once. "It's coming along," she says. You're not sure what it's coming along toward. Whatever it is, it's not in a hurry. The fire underneath flickers uncertainly. You feed it more wood, then whisper encouragement, which you've learned helps you more than the flames. The boy tosses in a handful of something that looks like moss and tells you it's forest spice. You don't question it because asking only leads to stories involving frogs, witches, and debts. Another woman, unfamiliar, wanders into the kitchen holding a basket of leeks and an attitude. She peers into your cauldron, makes a face like she's remembering an ex, and says, "Ah, first-timer stew." You nod politely. She drops in a leek without asking, then leaves. You don't know her name. You're not sure she lives here. The dog sits nearby, eyeing the pot like it knows how this ends. You suspect it's seen many such stews in its time, and maybe even a few better ones. It sneezes once, then lies down with the air of someone emotionally bracing for flavor. You keep stirring. The spoon has started to resist slightly, which you take as a sign that the stew is developing a personality or a crust. Either way, it's progress. After an hour, the gray deepens into a richer gray, which you tell yourself is good. Texture emerges: chunks of turnip, strips of something fibrous, and a few floating orbs you swear weren't there before. Margot returns, tastes a spoonful, and says, "Needs smoke." You're not sure if she means more of it or just a different kind. The kitchen already smells like every campfire that ended in wet socks, but you find a few sticks of dried herb from the shelf above the fireplace, crumble them into the cauldron, and stir. Something shifts. The scent sharpens. The bubbles become more opinionated. A trace of color, very faint, very green, swirls briefly near the surface before retreating back into the gray. The boy whistles, the kind of whistle people do when something explodes or almost tastes good. You ask if it's supposed to look like this. Margot just says, "It's got character." That's what people say when it's too late to start over. You lean in and inhale cautiously. The stew now smells like old garlic, bravery, and whatever that herb was. It's not pleasant, but it's bold. You can respect that. Someone brings bread. It's hard enough to be considered architecture, but it will help. The stew thickens just enough to stay on the spoon. You taste it. It's not bad. It's not good, but it's not bad. It tastes like you tried, which, honestly, is more than you expected. You ladle some into a bowl and hand it to the boy. He eats it without flinching, which feels like the highest compliment available. Outside, the sky darkens. Inside, the fire crackles, the pot burbles, and the kitchen smells like smoke, hope, and the faintest hint of maybe you'll get there. You keep stirring. The dough is not a dough so much as it is a statement. A firm, unyielding declaration that whatever softness you expected from bread, you will not be receiving it here. You were told to knead until it feels right, which is unhelpful advice. When the dough starts off feeling like granite and only gets meaner from there, Margot stands behind you, arms folded, eyebrows raised. "Put your back into it," she says, as though you haven't already offered this dough your shoulder, spine, and a piece of your soul. The table creaks under the weight of your enthusiasm, or maybe under the weight of the dough itself. It's hard to tell. Your hands are dusted in flour, your sleeves are rolled up, and your dignity is slowly being absorbed by the mixture, which has refused to rise out of either fear or spite. You punch it again. It punches back emotionally. The child arrives to help. Their version of helping is to throw more flour on the table and then onto the dog, who now looks like a ghost of itself. You try to shoo them away, but they insist on tasting the raw dough, make a face like they've seen eternity, and wander off muttering about brick soup. Eventually, the lump is declared ready by Margot, which seems suspicious because nothing has changed except your will to live. She slaps it into a roundish shape, carves a vaguely threatening X into the top with a blade that looks like it's seen several wars, and slides it into the oven like she's putting a body in the ground. You wait. You sit by the hearth. You nurse your wrists, which now click when you move them. The dog sighs. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster screams. You try not to take it personally. After an hour, the smell begins. It's warm, yeasty, slightly burnt at the edges, and somehow smells heavier than it should, like it's already committed to sinking in the stomach before it's even cooled. Margot opens the oven and reveals a loaf that has not so much risen as it has hardened into a topographical feature. You could put it on a map. She knocks on it. The sound it makes is legally wood. You attempt a joke about using it as a shield, but no one laughs. The boy tries to pick it up, but struggles. You help. Together you carry it to the table like pallbearers. Margot slices it with effort and an audible crack. The first bite is met with silence, followed by a crunch so sharp it echoes. Someone chips a tooth. You apologize to the tooth. Not the person, just the tooth. The man who sustained the injury waves you off and calls it character building. He now whistles slightly when he breathes, but says it's a fair trade for fresh bread. You're not sure this qualifies as fresh so much as forged, but it's technically edible, and in this kitchen, that's apparently enough. Everyone eats, slowly, with breaks. You try a piece. It's dense, earthy, and would probably survive a siege. There's flavor in there somewhere if you chew long enough. Past the wall of texture and through the fortification of crust, something vaguely nutty appears like a ghost of better bread. Margot says, "Not bad for a first try," which is her version of high praise. The boy offers to throw the leftover crusts at chickens to sharpen their instincts. You say yes, that feels appropriate. Later, when the bread is gone and your jaw feels like it's wrestled stone, you find a shard of crust on the floor. You pick it up. It doesn't bend. It doesn't crumble. It could go in a museum or a wall. You tuck it into your pocket. You don't know why, maybe as a reminder, maybe as a threat, maybe because, somehow, against all odds, this kitchen has started to feel a little bit like yours, and nothing says ownership like weaponized bread. You are told to fetch salt like it's a simple thing, like it's not the most sacred mineral in a 30-mile radius guarded by a man who may or may not have ever blinked. Margot gives you a small sack and a warning. Don't mention rain, rabbits, or elbows. You open your mouth to ask why, but she shuts it with a look that makes your brain reconsider speaking ever again. The salt man lives in a stone cottage at the edge of the village, which is less a cottage and more a leaning heap of secrets. Smoke curls from the chimney like it's lost. The door creaks when you knock, then swings open entirely on its own, revealing a hallway that smells like pepper and consequence. You enter. The man appears from the shadows wearing 5 layers of linen and a look that suggests he knows how you die. He sneezes into a handkerchief, then folds it so precisely it makes you feel deeply judged. "What seeks the seeker?" he says, voice crackling like firewood that doesn't want to burn. "You say you've come for salt." He raises an eyebrow. "What does the ocean lack but still contains?" he asks. You blink. He sneezes again, more violently this time, and gestures to a locked cabinet behind him. You try to answer. Water? Balance? Crabs? He frowns deeper with each guess until his face looks like a disappointed raisin. You panic and say, "A friend." He pauses, then nods once, slowly. You're not sure if you passed the test or if he just gave up. You hold out your sack. He does not move. "Payment," he says. You show him 2 buttons, a piece of cloth, and the stale heel of yesterday's bread. He sighs so hard the candle flickers. You rummage deeper into your tunic and produce the only item left, a single, briny pickle you were saving for emergencies or emotional support. It glistens in the light like hope preserved in vinegar. He snatches it without hesitation. You try not to feel hurt. He turns, unlocks the cabinet with a key that looks like it came from a shipwreck, and produces a small, heavy pouch. He opens it, dips 2 fingers in, and flings a pinch of salt into the air, where it hangs for a moment before falling like blessed dust. Then, finally, he hands it to you. The pouch is warm. The salt inside is coarse, shimmering, almost smug. You clutch it like a relic and back away slowly as the man begins humming to himself and retreating into the walls. You don't wait to see if he emerges again. Back at the kitchen, Margot sniffs the pouch and nods in satisfaction. "Good," she says. "Did he sneeze 3 times? You say yes. Lucky you. You don't ask what happens at 4. The salt goes into the stew with ceremony. A single pinch changes the entire smell of the kitchen. The boy sniffs the air and says it smells like a feast. The dog lifts its head. Even the cat enters the room willingly. You watch the salt dissolve into the bubbling pot like it was always meant to be there, like it knew this was home. You touch the pouch once more before placing it gently on the shelf, next to the sacred spoon and a jar labeled, possibly time. You feel oddly proud, as if you've returned from a quest. You did not slay a dragon, but you did stare down a cryptic old man while holding a pickle, and somehow that feels harder. "Add some," Margot says, pointing at the pile of ingredients like you've been trained in the ancient art of ambiguous measurement. You stare at the mound of flour, the heap of herbs, and the absolutely untrustworthy-looking root that might be a parsnip or a cursed potato. You ask, "How much is some?" She shrugs. "You'll know." This is a lie. You do not know. No one knows. There are no spoons marked some, no lines on the bowl that say too much or not enough. Just your hands, your increasingly frantic intuition, and a cauldron that makes a faint bubbling sound every time you hover too long like it's becoming impatient. You start with flour. You pinch a bit, then remember Breadgate, and toss in a more respectable handful. A white cloud puffs up like a ghost with asthma. You squint, wait for divine guidance, get none, and add a second scoop. The pot bubbles again, sharper this time, like a cough with judgment behind it. Margot says nothing. She's shelling peas in the corner, calmly watching the chaos you are about to birth. You move to the herbs. There are no labels, just bundles tied with string and dried into cryptic leafy tangles. You sniff one. It smells like grass and confidence. Another smells like bitter lemons and regretful decisions. You choose one that seems neutral and crumble a few leaves in. The stew lets out a long sigh. You pause. The dog lifts its head and stares at you like it too is concerned for what's about to happen. You turn your attention to the root. It sits on the counter, bulbous and lumpy, with small white hairs that imply it has opinions. You cut a slice off and immediately question every choice that led to this moment. It's wet, slightly purple on the inside, and smells like the inside of a medieval boot. "Some," you mutter, and toss in the slice. The pot hisses, actually hisses. You back away slightly, eyes wide, and glance at Margot. She's chewing on a pea pod, expression unreadable, which you're starting to suspect is her default setting. You ask if it's normal for the stew to react. She shrugs again. Sometimes it gets emotional. You stir. The spoon scrapes the bottom with a sound like a sigh through teeth. The texture thickens, loosens, then thickens again, as if it's trying to make up its mind. You whisper apologies to it. The pot responds by belching a single defiant bubble that splashes the rim and lands on your hand. It burns. You try to smile like it doesn't, because everyone else seems unbothered. The boy walks by, sniffs the air, and makes a noise that sounds like polite horror. You tell him it's still in development. He nods gravely, like you've just admitted to building a trebuchet indoors. You add more herbs. Why not? More flour too. The root gets another slice in, this time thinner. The pot gurgles, louder now, a chorus of heat and mild disapproval. You stir faster. Maybe if you move quickly, the flavors won't notice each other until it's too late. Bit more salt, Margot says, tossing it over her shoulder without looking. You fumble the pouch and nearly drop it into the fire. The salt, smug as always, lands in your palm. You add it, stir again, and watch as the mixture shifts into something almost edible looking. The gray recedes. The texture smooths. The smell changes, less field accident, more surprise dinner party. You taste it. It's not bad. You can't name a single thing in it, but it's warm, salty, and somehow comforting in the way mystery tea sometimes is. The dog walks over and licks the edge of your boot in approval. You take that as a win. Margot tastes a spoonful, nods once, and says, "Close enough," which, in this kitchen, might as well be a gold medal. You write nothing down. There are no recipes here, no notes, just the vague memory of some, a burn on your hand, and the knowledge that next time you'll probably mess it up differently, but you'll mess it up with style. The healer's garden smells like confusion, not the soft floral confusion of a mislabeled soap, but the deep, earthy, vaguely alarming kind you get from walking into a room where something has definitely been brewed, and no one will tell you what. The plants aren't in neat rows so much as spontaneous gatherings, huddled clumps of green and purple, and the occasional fuzzy yellow that hums suspiciously. You try not to step on anything alive. This proves difficult. The healer is named Thistle. That's not a nickname. That's the name she gave you when she appeared behind a tree and said, "You shouldn't touch that." You weren't touching anything. But you back away anyway and pretend you were never there. She wears a belt made entirely of small, dried bundles, each labeled with a single, cryptic symbol, and all of them smelling like different shades of danger. Her fingers are stained green and brown, and one of her eyebrows appears to have been permanently raised by an encounter with something disagreeable. She walks, like the ground answers to her, and gestures for you to follow. You do. She begins listing names, not of plants, but of people who didn't listen. That one thought nettles were spinach. That one brewed tea with nightshade for the flavor. That one, she says, pointing to a tree stump, asked if they could smoke poppy seeds. You don't ask what happened to that one. The stump looks judgmental. Thistle stops in front of a sprawling herb that looks like mint but smells like menthol and resentment. She picks a sprig, holds it up to your face and says, "This one makes you dream about bees." You blink. "What kind of bees?" She shrugs. "Depends what you deserve." Then she drops the sprig into your hand like a dare and turns away, already talking to a vine that may or may not be sentient. Back in the kitchen, you stare at the sprig for longer than you probably should. It's soft, slightly prickly at the edges, and gives off a smell that reminds you of old honey, pine smoke, and that feeling you get when you almost remember something important. The pot bubbles behind you, waiting. You drop it in. The change is instant. The smell curls upward and hits the ceiling with purpose. The steam thickens. The color of the stew shifts a few degrees into a deeper hue, like it's blushing or plotting something. Margot sniffs the air and says nothing. The boy walks in, pauses, and says, "It smells buzzier." You stir. The spoon moves more easily now, like the stew is no longer resisting you but guiding you, lifting slightly with each turn as if to say, "Yes," like that. The dog gets up, walks 3 circles, then lies back down and sighs in what sounds like resignation. You taste it. The flavor is unlike anything you've had before. It's sweet for a second, then sharp, then something herbal and strange sits on your tongue like a memory. You blink. The kitchen seems slightly brighter. You're not sure if it's the fire or your perception of the fire. You offer Margot a spoonful. She eats it, nods once, then looks at you for a beat too long. "You used the bee one, didn't you?" You nod. She sighs. "All right, Don't fall asleep near mirrors tonight. Just trust me. That sentence raises a number of questions you are not brave enough to ask. Later, as you sit on your stool, watching the last of the stew simmer down into something you might call a success, your thoughts begin to buzz faintly. Not painfully, not loudly, just a low hum, somewhere near the base of your skull, as if a bee is politely living in your mind and rearranging your dreams for optimal clarity. You lean back, stretch your sore arms, and let the sound settle. It's not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. The bowl is breathing. It shouldn't be, and yet it is, rising and falling with slow, deliberate movements that suggest sentience, or at least deep disapproval. You've been told, really, in the same tone someone might say, brace yourself to stir it. The thing in the bowl, the cheese, it does not look like cheese. It looks like something that crawled out of a damp cave, asked for a towel, and then changed its mind halfway through the sentence. It's pale, with veins of green and orange threading through like it's trying to become art, or perhaps simply develop camouflage. A thick crust clings to the edges, which crackle when disturbed, releasing a scent best described as ancient. You hold the spoon like a weapon and nudge it gently. It growls, not loudly, just a low, wet rumble that vibrates in the wood and through your bones like an old memory trying to get out. You look up, eyes wide. Margot doesn't even glance your way. That's normal, someone says behind you. You don't turn around because you're fairly certain the voice belongs to the man who lives in the barn and talks to walls. You stir faster. The consistency is somewhere between porridge and self-awareness. It clings to the spoon with reluctance, pulling back with each turn like it's offended by your audacity. You mutter something between a prayer and an apology, but the cheese doesn't seem to care. It hisses when you scrape too close to the bottom. The hissing is new. The boy walks by and gives you a thumbs up. Then he backs out of the room, slowly, like he's seen this before and does not intend to be present for the climax. You stir faster still. The smell thickens. It's yeasty, smoky, and alarmingly sharp like burnt garlic dipped in defiance. Your eyes water. You try to breathe through your mouth, but that's somehow worse. The taste of the air alone makes your teeth feel like they've sinned. Margot finally looks over, takes one glance, and nods. It's waking up nicely. You stare at her like she's just congratulated you on poking a bear in its sleep. This is cheese, you ask, because surely someone needs to confirm that this was ever dairy. Mostly, she says. Some of it was goat once. The rest is, well, you don't need to know. You disagree deeply, but also don't want to interrupt the cheese. It seems to be listening now, reacting to sound. You drop your voice to a whisper and continue stirring, slower now, in a counterclockwise rhythm that Margot insisted on. Clockwise, apparently, makes it fight back. The surface bubbles, then settles. The growl fades into a low purr. You take this as progress, even though you are now sweating and slightly afraid of what happens next. Margot brings over a chunk of bread, the sturdy kind that could survive a siege, and dips it into the bowl. She scoops up a piece of the cheese beast and pops it into her mouth without flinching. Then she chews, slowly. Her face does not change. You wait. Finally, she says, needs time. That's it. That's all. You could have sworn it needed an exorcism, but apparently what it really wants is seasoning. You don't question it. You just fetch the jar marked with a faded T and sprinkle a bit in. The cheese shivers, just once, then it goes still. You take that as permission to stop stirring. Later, when it's served at the long wooden table with other suspicious dishes, you watch people eat it with genuine enthusiasm. There are sounds of appreciation. Someone goes back for more. The dog licks the bowl. You sit with your bowl, watching the cheese melt gently across the bread like it hasn't just spent 15 minutes trying to assert dominance. You take a bite. It's good, really good. Complex, sharp, warm, and just a little bit dangerous. You chew carefully. because even now you're not entirely sure it's finished moving. The squirrel does not blink. You're holding it by the tail, which, in hindsight, may not be the most respectful way to cradle your dinner. It stares at you with glassy eyes full of accusation and the faint echo of better decisions. You don't remember agreeing to this task, but you also don't remember saying no, which, in this kitchen, is all the permission anyone needs. Next to the squirrel on the table lie 2 radishes that look like they've seen war and a fish that refuses to die with dignity. It flops violently, then stops, then flips again as if to say, "I'm watching you." You don't feel prepared to argue. Margot walks by, glances at the pile of questionable ingredients, and simply says, "Stew." Then she's gone, trailing a scent of herbs and mild condescension. You're left alone with your new friends and a growing sense of dread. You name the dish Desperation Delight. You start with the radishes because they seem the least likely to fight back. They're soft in that way, where you're not sure if it's natural or a warning. You slice them, or at least you try. Your knife keeps sticking, and one of the radishes peels itself just to get it over with. It's that kind of day. The squirrel is more complicated. You've never skinned a squirrel before. You've never wanted to skin a squirrel before. But you're here now. The fire's lit, and Margot keeps shouting from the other room, "Is it prepped yet?" Like that's a helpful thing to say. You do your best. There's fur in places you didn't expect, and bones where bones shouldn't be. Eventually, the creature resembles something vaguely meat-adjacent. You drop it into the pot with a soft plunk and a prayer for forgiveness. The fish is still breathing. You make eye contact, and it flutters a fin like it's debating escape again. You hesitate. The boy walks by, takes one look, and says, "If it's still moving when it hits the stew, that's good luck." You're not sure he's right. You're not sure he's wrong either. You're not sure the boy even exists outside moments like these. You throw in the fish. It thrashes once more, then stills. Steam rises from the pot in cautious curls. The squirrel bobs to the surface and immediately sinks again like it knows this is not its finest moment. You stir. The broth turns the color of decisions made in the dark. The smell is complex, earthy, smoky, faintly resentful. You find some wild garlic left over from yesterday's near poisoning and toss that in too. It sizzles and vanishes beneath the surface like a sacrifice. A bubble rises, pops, the stew burps, and a splatter lands on your sleeve. You decide to leave it there, a badge of honor, or perhaps a warning. Margot returns. She peers into the pot and makes a sound that might be approval or indigestion. "Needs more root," she mutters, handing you a shriveled thing that might be parsnip or a very confident worm. You don't ask. You just chop and toss and stir. Everyone gathers when the sun starts to dip. Bowls clatter. Spoons emerge from pockets and sleeves like this is something they've been rehearsing. You ladle the stew into mismatched bowls, each portion containing an unidentifiable chunk that may or may not be radish. You sit. You eat. It's not terrible. It's warm, and it fills the hollow space that's been growing in your stomach since the chicken incident. The squirrel is surprisingly tender. The fish has given up all its bitterness. The radish tastes like surrender. It all works in a way that makes no sense, and yet feels exactly right. You take another bite, and for the first time today, no one judges you, not even the stew. The rain starts with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they've ruined better people than you. One drop, then 10, then a sheet of cold sky water that slaps the roof with all the subtlety of a debt collector. The fire crackles nervously. The pot stares up at you like it's not entirely convinced you know what you're doing, which is fair, because you don't. You're told to keep dinner going. You, specifically. Margot has gone to check the sheep, which you suspect is code for not deal with this, and the boy is somewhere under the table, pretending to be a log. The chimney coughs and starts dripping. A slow leak right into the middle of the hearth, each drop landing with a hiss and a sigh like the sky is participating in your failure. You press your hat onto your head, not because it helps, but because it gives your panic a sense of formality. The water in the pot is not boiling, it's not even hot. It's thinking about being hot, maybe, in the way you think about going for a run but never quite move. You poke the fire with the spoon because all the poking sticks are damp. Sparks fly, one of them lands on your sock, and you stomp it out like you're trying to impress an audience that has long since left the tent. The rain finds a new way in. Not from above, this time, but sideways. It enters through a crack in the wall that has never mattered before today, and somehow pours directly into the pot. You watch the water level rise. You do not scream, but the sound you make is close cousins with screaming. You try to shield the pot with your body, which helps about as much as yelling at clouds. It's soup now. It wasn't supposed to be, but it is. The thin, brothy kind that tastes mostly like warm thoughts and a hint of onion. You stir anyway, because movement feels like control, and control is a nice illusion when everything is wet. Someone hands you a ladle. You don't know who. They vanish before you can ask. It might have been the dog. The pot groans. It's subtle at first, a low noise like a tired stomach or the floorboards when the ghost is pacing. Then it burbles, and bubbles rise like angry punctuation. You back up and offer it the ladle. The pot, insulted, ignores you. You stir again and whisper something that could be encouragement or surrender. Margot returns, soaked and smug. She peers into the pot, tastes a spoonful, and says, "You thinned it. Good." You resist the urge to explain that the sky did most of the work. She's already moving on, wringing water from her sleeves into a bowl of flour like it's a normal thing to do. Dinner is served late. No one complains. They're too wet for complaints. Everyone holds their bowls with two hands, steaming puddles of soup that contain slivers of vegetables and maybe a memory of meat. The dog gets its own dish. The boy resurfaces from under the table, damp and triumphant. You sit by the fire, or what's left of it, trying to dry your knees. The soup is bland, but warm, and no one's sick yet, so that's a kind of win. Margot passes you a slice of cheese that doesn't growl, and a look that might be approval. Outside, the rain continues. Inside, the pot settles. You eat slowly, quietly, while the walls drip and the spoons clink, and someone begins humming a song that doesn't have words but might still mean something. It's not perfect. It's not dry, but somehow, it's still dinner. It begins with a sneeze. Not yours, though you've been on the brink for hours, but the sneeze of the old man with the beard that reaches his knees and the voice like dry leaves. He doesn't even cook. He just visits sometimes, says things like, "The moon smells," anxious, then leaves before you can ask follow-up questions. But today he sneezes, violently, while passing too close to the cauldron. And the cauldron responds. It shudders, just a little, like a horse about to bolt or a cousin about to say something regrettable at a wedding. Then it tips. Not fast, not slow, just inevitability made physical. You lunge, because that's what you've seen people do in moments like this, but your boots slip on a smear of yesterday's porridge incident, and all you do is flail meaningfully. The cauldron goes over. The stew, today's proud experiment in turnips plus whatever was behind the shed, spills out in a steaming tidal wave. It splashes across the hearth, over your boots, and onto the brick floor, where it immediately begins plotting escape through the cracks. The fire hisses like an insulted cat. A puff of smoke erupts into the air and paints the ceiling with the ghost of disappointment. Somewhere outside, a pig screams. You don't ask. Margot enters mid-chaos, takes one look, and mutters, "Again?" As if this is a pattern, and worse, a predictable one. She doesn't help. She just starts slicing more bread, like the answer to every culinary disaster is toast. You reach for a rag, a bucket, your dignity. None of them are particularly close. The boy shows up with a look of deep, performative sorrow. "Oh no," he says, in the exact tone one might use to narrate a frog funeral. He gestures at the spill, then at the sky, then back at you. "Did you stir widdershins again?" You don't know what that means. You don't ask. You just kneel and begin scooping half-cooked root vegetables back into the pot with a bowl someone left behind last week. The stew is no longer edible, but it's still warm, and that's something. The bread, which had been cooling neatly on the windowsill like an illustration from a happier storybook, now watches you with palpable judgment. It's a crusty loaf, heavy and firm, and it knows it deserved better. You swear it sighs when you glance its way. You attempt to explain to Margot that it wasn't your fault, that the old man sneezed, that the floor was slick, that gravity is, in fact, aggressive. She raises an eyebrow, says, "The stew gods demand balance," and returns to slicing bread with the kind of precision normally reserved for revenge. Eventually, the floor is cleanish. The cauldron is upright. The fire is coaxed back to life with a mix of twigs, patience, and at least one incantation from the dog. The pot is empty, save for a suspicious smear that smells like boiled hope. Dinner is bread. Just bread. A lot of bread. It's good bread, honestly, but every bite feels like a quiet reminder that you failed to contain a meal. The others don't say it out loud, but they don't need to. They eat in solemn silence, punctuated only by chewing and the occasional glug of weak ale. You chew slowly and vow never to let the cauldron win again. Then the old man sneezes from somewhere outside, and the pig screams again. You decide tomorrow. Maybe. Someone else should cook. You're not even supposed to be near the stew today. That was the agreement. After the cauldron incident, your culinary privileges were quietly revoked and replaced with supervised observation, which is a fancy way of saying, don't touch anything, stand in the corner, and maybe think about what you've done. But Margot leaves the room for exactly 43 seconds, and in that time, 3 things happen. First, you notice the honey. It's not labeled, because nothing in this kitchen is labeled, but it's thick, golden, and probably not sap this time. You mean to just admire it, maybe sniff it with the kind of appreciation that says, I'm very mature and trustworthy. But your elbow thinks differently and gently nudges the jar into the pot. You freeze. The stew hisses, then burps. You stare at it like it just confessed its love. There is no time to recover, because the second thing happens. Ash. From the edge of the hearth, a gust of wind, or possibly divine mischief, lifts a soft cloud and deposits it directly into the bubbling stew. You make a sound that isn't quite a word, more a combination of guilt and surprise, but still, no one is around to hear it. You grab the spoon and stir, because that's what people do when they panic, and also because you're hoping motion will confuse the ingredients into becoming something edible. That's when the bug happens, a small one, not the juicy kind, thankfully, but still a creature with legs and opinions. It lands delicately on the rim of the pot, pauses possibly to reconsider its life choices, and then falls in. You don't scream. You inhale very sharply and hold your breath, like that might undo the last 5 seconds of your life. The stew bubbles again. Then it settles. You consider running. Instead, you keep stirring. Like if you stir long enough, the laws of flavor might rewrite themselves. When Margot returns, she glances into the pot, sniffs, and narrows her eyes like she knows something's off, but can't quite prove it. You pretend to be deeply focused on the angle of the spoon. At dinner, the stew is served without ceremony. You sit as far from the pot as possible and brace for coughing, choking, or spiritual evacuation. But none of that happens. Instead, the first person to taste it makes a small noise of surprise. Then another takes a bite. Then another. Heads nod. Someone mutters, "Oh, that's new," and goes back for a second helping. The boy licks his bowl and looks impressed, which is unsettling because he's rarely impressed by anything that doesn't involve fire or fart jokes. Margot eats last. She tilts her head thoughtfully, then looks at you. "What did you add?" You panic. Then you smile. Balance, you say. I added balance. She nods like, that's a real answer. By the time the meal ends, people are asking what it's called. You haven't named anything before. You consider something modest, like stew accident, no, 7. But Margot's already calling it your stew, and the others are repeating it like a chant. Someone even scratches the name into the wooden shelf above the hearth. Your stew. It sounds ridiculous. It also sounds like victory. You help clean up, pretending this was all intentional, like you've always known that honey and ash and accidental insects were the missing trio of medieval cuisine. You wipe the rim of the pot and feel a strange surge of pride. Later, in bed, you stare at the ceiling and whisper, please don't let them ask me to make it again, because even miracles have a recipe you don't remember. You wake up to the sound of bells, not the pleasant kind, but the frantic kind that suggests something has gone terribly right. People are running, which is never a good sign. You are handed a flower crown and a radish within 30 seconds of leaving your bed, and no one explains why. It's feast day, someone says, like that clarifies anything. Apparently, it's a tradition. You don't remember agreeing to traditions, but now you're wearing leaves and holding a vegetable, and everyone seems thrilled about it. There's music. There are streamers made from wool and possibly goat hair. Someone's juggling eggs near the fire, which is bold, if not wise. Margot approaches with a smile that's mostly threat. You're cooking the main. You laugh because surely she's joking. She doesn't laugh back. Instead, she places a very sharp spoon in your hand. It's not ceremonial. It's just all that's available. Then she says the 4 words that end any hope you had for peace. Don't mess it up. The main is a goat. Or was a goat. Now it's a possibility. You are pointed to a pen and a very specific goat named Eloise, who has eyes like she's seen war and possibly started it. The plan is to prepare a roast. Eloise has other plans, which include climbing the fence, stealing a basket of pears, and leading 3 children and a dog on a winding chase through the garden while you trip over a hoe and land in a patch of suspicious-looking herbs. By the time you catch her, the pears are gone, the children are exhausted, and the dog has changed allegiances. The side dish, meanwhile, was once a nice arrangement of root vegetables and dried apples, now scattered across the dirt like casualties of a very polite battle. You try to salvage some. A beet slaps your hand and rolls into a puddle. You stare after it like it betrayed you. You drag Eloise back with the dignity of someone who no longer believes in dignity. She seems smug. The spoon, still tucked in your belt, like a weapon of last resort, is glints in the sun. You begin to understand why some people just eat bread and call it a day. The fire is already burning when you return. Margot gives you a nod and tosses you a bundle of herbs that smells both medicinal and slightly aggressive. You rub it onto the meat like it's a spell and hope for the best. As the goat roasts slowly, unevenly, and with an occasional hiss that might be personal, you work on the side dish. You find a new beat. It doesn't slap you. Progress, but peace is temporary. The boy, high on sugar and unsupervised joy, declares a duel. His weapon of choice, a spoon. Unfortunately, it's your spoon, the sharp one, the one currently meant to turn the goat. He grabs it mid-flip, yells something about honor, and runs off. You chase him. You trip again. The goat, now halfway cooked and confused, nearly slides into the fire. Someone cheers. Someone else plays a flute. No one helps. Eventually, you recover the spoon. You don't ask what it was used for in the meantime. You don't want to know. By evening, the goat is, against all odds, edible. The vegetables are slightly burnt, but framed as caramelized by someone who winks too much. The feast begins. There is dancing. There is toasting. No one chokes. Only one person cries. And that's just because they love pears. They love the meal. You sit down, exhausted, fingers stained with herbs, face smudged with ash, and watch people eat like it was always going to turn out this way. Margot clinks her mug against yours and says, "Told you feast day was easy." You smile, because you're too tired to argue. Also, because your spoon is safe. You are handed a flat disc of dough and told to mind the oven. That's the entire instruction. No time limit, no steps, just those 3 words delivered with the gravity of a prophecy and the vagueness of a curse. You glance at the oven in question. It is, quite literally, a hole in the wall, a hole that radiates heat and judgment and smells like someone once cooked a sin in there and never truly cleaned up afterward. You squat in front of it, holding the dough like it's a baby you didn't ask for. Someone walks by and nods solemnly, mutters, "May the crust be ever in your favor," and keeps going. That's not helpful. That's barely English. The oven crackles. You do your best to look like you belong here, like you are the sort of person who minds ovens on the regular. But the truth is, you have no idea what stage the fire is at. There's a pile of coals doing a slow, angry glow in the back, and the air is hot enough to make your eyebrows consider their options. But otherwise, you're guessing. Still, you slide the dough in with the long wooden paddle like you've seen others do, and it lands inside the oven with a soft thump and a puff of flour. You stare at it. It stares back. Time passes. You poke your head toward the opening. Heat slaps you. You pull back. You're not sure how long it's supposed to take. No one gave you a clock, or instructions, or support. Just mind the oven. You try humming to it. That feels right. That feels like what someone who's minding an oven might do. The dough begins to swell slightly. That's good, right? Bread is supposed to do that. Rise, flourish, become. Then it starts to bubble. Then it hisses. You lean in. Not too far. Just enough to witness the moment the surface splits and steam shoots out with the sound of an opinion no one asked for. The dough lifts at one edge, curls unnaturally, and then, with a mighty thump and a sound like a distant insult, it explodes. Not entirely. Not in a dangerous way. Just enough that flour and crusty bits hit your shirt and the nearby wall and at least one unsuspecting dog. There is a moment of silence. Then applause. Actual applause. Someone shouts, "That's the spirit!" Another yells, "Now it's festive." And before you can protest that explosions were never part of your culinary plan, 3 people are patting your back like you just passed some obscure rite of passage. Margot peeks around the corner, sees the flour in your hair, and nods like this was inevitable. You pull the tray out. What remains of the bread has formed a twisted, golden halo of crust and ambition. It smells incredible. It looks like abstract art. You hold it up and someone tosses a sprig of herbs at you like it's a bouquet. You're still confused. They eat the bread anyway. They break it with their hands, dip it in leftover stew, laugh between bites, and declare it surprisingly expressive. The old man with the knees for beard says it reminded him of a lightning storm he once had feelings about. You thank him, because arguing would just make things worse. Later, while sweeping up the breadcrumbs and contemplating your new role as accidental innovator, someone says, "You'll mind the oven again tomorrow, yes?" You consider fleeing the village, but then again, they clapped. The kitchen is cleaner than usual, which is to say, someone kicked a pile of hay into a corner and opened a window. A faint breeze sneaks in, stirring the scent of overboiled leeks and anxiety. You are wearing your least charred tunic, which still has a mysterious smear across the front, but you've turned it around so at least the smear isn't making eye contact. You are very aware of your own breathing, because today, the Lord is coming to dinner. No one calls him by name. They just say, "The Lord," like his title, is enough to invoke weather changes and ulcer flare-ups. You've never seen the villagers move so quickly. One woman wept openly while peeling onions. Another tried to polish the floor with a dead rabbit. Someone else, possibly joking, possibly not, sharpened a ladle. You were told to make the main dish. No pressure. Just impress a man who bathes in rosewater and thinks turnips are a slur. You stare at your ingredients: a bundle of root vegetables, half a cabbage, and a slightly guilty-looking goose egg. You ask about meat. They laugh. Not at you, at the idea of meat existing. Still, you try. You arrange the firewood like you're stacking the foundation of your dignity. The flame catches with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests it knows you're being watched. You chop the vegetables slowly, carefully, as though the knife might alert the Lord to your station in life. Everything you do is silent, methodical, reverent. You're creating art, or trying not to cause an international incident. From the corner, an old woman mutters, "He likes his turnips roasted but not roasty." You nod as if that's a helpful distinction. The pot goes on. The smell builds. Not bad. Earthy. Honest. You throw in a sprig of that herb the healer swore would make dreams vivid. You hope it only works during sleep. Then the horn sounds. You stiffen. Somewhere in the distance, a gate creaks, and several villagers faint in perfect sequence. A man with one tooth bows to nothing in particular. The Lord has arrived. You don't see him enter. He just appears, like a noble fog, cloak billowing, rings on every finger, including one that seems to hum slightly. He glides to the hearth, peers into your pot, and hums. You are not prepared for this moment. Your mouth forgets how to close. Someone slides a bowl into your hand. You serve him. You do not breathe. He takes the first bite, chews slowly, pauses, then eats the rest like he's just remembered hunger. "Rustic," he says, and it echoes off every surface like a decree. Unexpected, but honest. You nod like this was the goal all along. He takes another bite. A third. He asks what it's called. You panic. Your brain coughs up the only phrase you can remember under pressure. "Turnip." Surprise. He smiles. Not with his mouth, but with the faint lift of an eyebrow that might mean approval or execution. You choose to believe the former. The rest of the table eats. They do not speak. They do not blink. They are watching him. And he, to your astonishment, finishes the bowl, places it down gently, stands. "I shall return," he says. And just like that, he disappears. You remain frozen. Someone pats your back. Someone else hands you a chunk of bread like a medal. Margot whispers, "He's never finished a dish before." You nod, then promptly pass out into the cleanest pile of hay you've ever fallen in. The churn stares at you with the patience of something that knows it's winning. It hasn't moved in an hour. You, on the other hand, have churned your arm into the kind of ache that could probably be written about in a ballad. The cream inside sloshes. That's all it does. No thickening, no transformation. Just an indifferent swirl of liquid that is absolutely not becoming butter. You try adjusting your grip. You try faster. You try slower. You try coaxing it. Nothing. It's like trying to reason with soup. Margot walks by, glances into the churn, makes a sound like a disapproving bell, and walks away. She's started doing that more often. It doesn't help. You keep going, because what else are you going to do? Admit defeat to dairy? Let the cream win? You're already several blisters into this journey. The muscles in your arm feel like they've signed up for the wrong sort of apprenticeship. The sun has shifted, the fire's gone out, and the cream remains, creamy. Then old Gilda appears. She doesn't walk so much as float in a fog of wool and herbal disappointment. She leans over your shoulder, squints into the churn like it's personally insulted her family, and says, "Have you tried singing to it?" You blink. She's serious. "Sometimes," she adds, "they need coaxing. A bit of music. Something to remind them who they are." You look into the churn. It offers no signs of identity. Still, you try, because nothing else has worked. You clear your throat and start humming the only tune you can remember that isn't just the rhythm of failure. It's a sort of half-remembered lullaby, or possibly a tavern song about soup. You hum, then you sing. The churn gurgles. You take that as encouragement. You sing louder. The cream sloshes like it's trying to escape your pitch. You switch to humming again. Still nothing. You reach for another song. This time something vaguely romantic. The churn burps. You stop. Someone claps behind you. It's one of the children. He looks delighted, like watching you try to serenade your way to butter is the best entertainment this village has offered in months. He calls his friends. Soon, there's an audience. So you double down. You try falsetto. You try a dramatic pause. You try singing directly to the churn with the intensity of a lover in a play. The churn responds by spitting a small amount of cream onto your tunic and somehow being even less buttery than before. Maybe it's cursed, someone offers. Maybe you're cursed, someone else suggests. The village healer steps forward, dips a finger in the churn, tastes it, and declares, "It lacks confidence." At this point, you're not sure if they're helping or writing a folktale about your failure in real time. You churn faster. You sing louder. You stomp your foot like that will shake the butter into existence. It does not. It resists. Stubborn, immune to melody, indifferent to rhythm. You are defeated not by fire or knives or angry chickens, but by the world's most emotionally unavailable cream. After several more minutes and one last off-key verse of something that may have been about cows falling in love, you stop. You lift the lid. It's still cream, somehow thinner. Everyone nods. Sometimes, Gilda says softly, the butter just doesn't want to come. You ask what you're supposed to do now. She hands you a piece of bread and says, "Eat around it." That night, you sit by the hearth, arms sore, ego bruised, and spoon dry bread into your mouth while the churn sits smugly in the corner like a guest who never left. No one talks about it, but someone starts humming. The stew from 3 days ago has developed a crust that could qualify as a minor geological formation. No one seems concerned. In fact, a boy pokes it with a stick, shrugs, and calls it still good. You wonder if he means the stew or the stick. This is your first lesson in medieval preservation, a process governed less by science and more by optimism and a disturbing tolerance for flavor evolution. Margot leads you to a shelf lined with what you initially think are ornamental rocks. She picks one up. It squishes. "Cheese," she says proudly. You nod like that's a word you still understand. She explains it's been aged, which seems to mean forgotten about until it reappeared in a dream. You hold it close to your nose. The scent is aggressive. It smells like secrets and betrayal, with hints of goat. "This one's buried," she adds, tapping another lump in a cloth pouch. You blink. She explains, in the same tone someone might use for weather, that sometimes cheese is placed underground in a jar to settle. When you ask what it's settling from, she simply says, "It gets restless above ground." You don't pursue it. Then comes the meat. It hangs like wind chimes for someone who collects regrets. Long strands of dried something sway gently from the ceiling. You ask what kind of meat it is. The answer is a shrug. You ask how long it's been there. Another shrug. You ask if it's supposed to be that color. A third shrug, followed by, "It'll darken once it's ready. Ready for what isn't clear." Later, you discover the pickling system. Jars of floating things, suspended in vinegars and brines, and possibly the tears of anyone who's tried to identify them. One jar contains something pale and wrinkled. You ask what it is. The woman next to you says, "We think it's fruit." You hope so. A child brings you what appears to be a leather pouch tied with twine and ambition. Inside is more meat, smoked, dry, chewy. You gnaw it like a medieval dog with trust issues. It's not bad. You can't taste anything specific, but it reminds you of effort, of something someone tried really hard not to waste. You begin to understand. Preservation isn't about saving food. It's about refusing to admit defeat. It's about saying, "I see your expiration date and raise you 6 more weeks in a barrel." It's about accepting that sometimes flavor is optional. You learn to wrap bread in cloth and tuck it into corners of the hearth like it's being punished. You help pack salt around root vegetables until they look like guests at a snow-themed banquet. You assist in creating a vinegar strong enough to take the shine off a copper pot. Every method has its place. Every technique has a story. Usually one that ends with someone getting mildly ill but living to tell it. And then comes the final test. You're handed a bowl of yesterday's stew. It might also be the stew from 2 yesterdays ago, possibly 3. It has layers, a memory of warmth, a current of something spicy, and a finish that could be described as haunting. You take a bite. It's edible, which, here, is considered a triumph. Someone claps. You're not sure if it's for the stew or for your survival. You don't ask. Because in this kitchen, leftovers aren't a burden. They're a tradition, a gamble, a communal dare wrapped in cabbage and hope. And tomorrow, you'll serve it again with something new added. Maybe a root, maybe a prayer, probably both. The title arrives before breakfast. You're elbow deep in something that might be porridge, but also might be a mistake when old Gilda announces it, loudly. Master of the pot, she says, like it's a promotion, like it's not a sentence to life without clean fingernails or personal dignity. The room nods in agreement. Someone even claps. You're too confused to object. You glance down at the pot, which is currently boiling in a way that suggests it has opinions. You nod back at it, not out of confidence, but because you're unsure if you're technically its employee now. A boy appears beside you. He's holding a single potato in both hands like it's a sacred relic. His eyes are wide, reverent. For the master, he whispers. You take it. You do not cry, but something shifts behind your eyes like tears making up their minds. From that moment, the kitchen changes. People start bringing you things: roots, bones, a jar of something labeled only with a question mark. You do not ask. You simply stir. Stirring, it turns out, is most of what being in charge is. That, and pretending to know when the stew is ready. Ready for what? No one ever specifies. Margot starts deferring to you. Margot, who once swatted you with the sacred spoon for suggesting the stew could use a touch of salt. Now she waits, watches, offers you the spoon like it's a crown. You accept it with 2 hands. It's sticky. The hearth hisses behind you, as if testing your resolve. You stir. The children have begun offering tributes daily now. Today it's an egg, a single sprig of thyme, and something that might be a mushroom or might be a slug playing dead. You include it anyway. That's what being in charge is. Not knowing everything but looking like you meant to. You stop flinching when the pot bubbles ominously. You speak to the fire like it's your temperamental pet. You even yell at the spit, which spins only when it wants to. It listens more now. You think you've earned its fear. There's a rhythm to it all now, a strange harmony in the chaos. You bark orders, you delegate the butter, you rearrange jars. You make someone cry by saying, "Less turnip." You taste something and nod as if that meant anything. They all copy the nod. That night, during supper, you sit slightly elevated on a stack of firewood that someone declared your throne. The stew is acceptable, which, here, is basically royal cuisine. People chew thoughtfully. The bread doesn't crack teeth. The wine is only mildly suspicious. Someone says, "You've done it again," as if this wasn't mostly guessing and accidental seasoning. You bow your head. They cheer. There is soot in your hair and a cabbage leaf stuck to your back. You haven't been properly clean in days. Your hands smell like onions and quiet desperation, and yet, something about it feels almost right. You're the cook now. You didn't ask for this, but you've got the spoon. The fire listens, and tomorrow, someone else will bring you a potato like an offering to a minor kitchen deity. You'll accept it, and stir. You decide that your culinary legacy should not die with you, especially not after yesterday's miracle where you accidentally created a dish that people are still moaning about in their sleep. The stew that launched 1,000 spoons, the honey ash bug delight. So now, with the confidence of someone who has no idea how they succeeded in the first place, you sit down to write a recipe. You stare at the blank parchment. The inkpot regards you with judgment. You dip the quill, hesitate, and then confidently write the word stew. It does not feel sufficient. You try again. Stew for survival or emotional comfort. That feels closer. You underlined it, which makes it official. Then comes the ingredients list. You write some roots, but immediately scratch it out because you've seen what happens when people interpret some freely. You try to remember what you actually used last time, but it becomes a montage of panic, spilled ladles, and a bug that may or may not have screamed. You write one bug, willing, and hope for the best. Flour, maybe? You think flour was involved. You draw a small pile of what could be flour, or sand, or a poorly rendered cloud. You label it flour, probably. Next comes the method. You do not remember the method. There was smoke, yes, and shouting, and someone yelled, "Is this supposed to hiss like that?" But none of that feels like something you can capture in words. So you draw. A sequence of events unfolds in stick figures. One pouring, one stirring, one on fire, one crying. You erase the tear. No need to immortalize that. You try to write instructions next to the pictures. Add things until it stops looking angry. Stir until smoke becomes less aggressive. Do not lick the spoon if it growls. You pause to admire your work. A monk appears, silently, as monks do. He peers at the parchment, tilts his head, and murmurs, "Ah," a lyrical rendering of transmutation through heat, bold, subtle, nearly divine. You stare at him. He calls over 2 more monks. They nod in unison, stroking imaginary beards, even the one who doesn't have one. One of them begins to hum. You're not sure what's happening, but the parchment is taken reverently and placed on a cushion. A child is sent to fetch the abbot. You think about asking for it back, but you're now surrounded by murmurs of masterful symbolism and a deconstruction of the culinary soul. One monk bows to you, deeply. Meanwhile, the kitchen is left unattended. This is your mistake. The fire, which has long been waiting for its moment, stretches out with a joyful crackle and licks the edge of the tablecloth. No one notices until the smoke starts doing that thing again, forming vague shapes and offering opinions. Someone yells. Someone else throws flour, which creates a cloud of edible panic. The sacred spoon is used to smack a burning onion, and a potato is thrown out the window on pure instinct. Eventually, the fire is put out by Margot, dumping the entire butter churn on it. The churn sighs in relief. The fire hisses. The room smells like singed dairy and moral failure. The parchment is safe, though, tucked beneath the monk's robe, guarded like a holy relic. You sit in the corner, covered in soot and self-doubt, wondering how exactly you became a spiritual authority in accidental cuisine. Someone places a fresh parchment in your hands. They smile gently. "Volume 2?" they ask. You sigh, pick up the quill, and draw a spoon with teeth. The fire, for once, dies with dignity. No pops, no sizzles, no final hiss like it's cursing your bloodline. Just a gentle collapse into ash, like it too is tired of this entire arrangement and has chosen peace. You watch it go, half expecting it to resurrect itself in one final act of spite. But it doesn't. It just fades. The kitchen is warm, not because anything is currently ablaze, but because it's finally earned the right to be. Everything smells vaguely edible. Nothing is actively threatening to bubble over or launch itself at a passerby. You didn't think this moment would ever come. Honestly, you thought you'd be consumed in a cheese-related explosion before the week was out. But here you are. Your last meal is ready. It's simple. A stew, obviously, because you've made peace with the fact that stew is less a dish and more a lifestyle. But this one doesn't fight back. It simmers politely. It has layers, like you've been told onions do, but fewer tears. The bread is chewable. That's the highest compliment the bread's ever received. Someone claps just biting into it. People gather, slowly, suspicious at first, as if the room might still be haunted by the ghost of dinners past. But nothing rattles. No one screams. The only shriek comes from a child who finds an unusually round potato and decides it must be magic. You agree. Everything feels like magic now, mostly because nothing is on fire. You serve with a ladle you didn't break, plates you didn't chip, a smile that doesn't feel like it's hiding sheer panic. And they eat. They eat without flinching, without reaching for emergency herbs, without needing to spit into a nearby jar labeled for emergencies only. One man cries, claims it reminds him of his mother. You choose not to ask if that's a good thing. Even the goat shows up. You lock eyes. It nods. It's not forgiveness, exactly, but something close. The kind of nod one gives to a worthy rival at the end of a long, ridiculous war. You nod back. Mutual understanding. You'll never be friends, but you won't be enemies. That's enough. Someone hands you the spoon. The spoon. The sacred, cursed, slightly sticky wooden spoon that's been with you through every culinary horror this place could throw. You almost expect it to whisper something cryptic, maybe sigh dramatically, or hum a threatening tune. But it doesn't. It's quiet, still, resting. You lay it down gently. A collective breath is held. It doesn't move. The crowd erupts into applause. There's no trumpet, no official announcement, but somehow everyone knows. This is your last day, your last dish, your final moment in this chaotic, flour-dusted theater of fire, soup, and mild psychological warfare. And you survived. You didn't flee. You didn't explode. You didn't get cursed by cheese. You made food. People ate it, lived, applauded. The monk gives you a thumbs up. The kitchen dog doesn't bark at you. A child hands you a pebble with reverence, as if it's a medal. You accept it. It feels heavier than it is. As the evening settles in, the smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, not angry this time, just wistful. It dances a little, forms the shape of what could be a smile before drifting into the night. You sit down, you breathe, and for the first time since this began, the kitchen is still. Content. So are you.